First off, Happy New Year's and all that. We made it around the sun once again. I was a bit worried, but we managed to somehow make the trip yet again. Anyway, sometimes a story doesn't have to be blatantly false to be an urban legend, but only has to be greatly exaggerated. This is one of those cases. If you haven't lived under a rock for the past 13 years, you'll have heard of Pokemon. For those of you who have lived under a rock, I'll give you the briefest of rundowns. Pokemon, which is called Pocket Monsters in Japan, is a series of RPGs mostly for Nintendo's handheld systems, in which you control a young child who is a Pokemon trainer who captures and trains Pokemon and fights them against other trainers' Pokemon. Yeah, so basically, animal slavery. The gameplay is all about collecting all the different critters and leveling them up, as well as evolving them into more powerful forms. By the way, evolution is one of those things that is so misunderstood in popular culture, and I blame Pokemon for a lot of that. I don't really want to get too much into it, but it doesn't involve something spontaneously turning into something else. I really wish they would have not used the word, and instead called it metamorphosis. Quick story. One time, years ago, I was on IRC, and this Nimrod was telling me that evolution was nonsense because they've never found an animal in the middle of evolving into something else. His screen name was a Pokemon, and I made him cry. Anyway, the series has been on the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and DS, as well as various spin-offs appearing on those, as well as the Nintendo 64, GameCube, and Wii. The series became vastly popular and led to all sorts of merchandising tie-ins and, of course, a Saturday morning cartoon. The cartoon itself, simply titled Pokemon, is an anime that originally aired in Japan and was redubbed to English and edited for content for airing in America, where it was also wildly successful. Personally, I never got caught up in the Pokemon craze. I played the original game, and while it was fun for a while, I got bored with it quickly and never finished it. If you've played one Pokemon game, you've pretty much played them all, so I passed on the sequels and spin-offs. The cartoon is retarded. Straight up, balls out retarded. But that's just part of the general decline of children's television and why we have a new generation of ADD patients. Anyway, the legend itself has to do with a specific episode of the TV show that causes seizures in people who watch it. This much is actually true, but it's been so greatly exaggerated that it became legend. The legend simply has to do with the scale of what happened. If you're to believe some people, 12,000 people went into seizures during the episode and had to be hospitalized, leading to widespread panic, new laws being drafted regarding the use of flashing lights in Japanese cartoons, and the episode never being seen again. Some have said that the episode has been shown again, and even brought to America, only with the seizure-causing scene left out. Well, out of all that, the only things that are true is that the episode did cause seizures, and that it was never aired again. People who repeat the story can't seem to agree on exactly which episode it was, so first let me clear that up. Now keep in mind, this was never shown in America, so it doesn't have an English name. The Japanese name is Denno Senshi Porygon, which would translate most accurately as Computer Soldier Porygon, having to do with the Pokemon Porygon, which only exists on the internet or something. Like I said, stupid. The scene in question has to do with the character Pikachu, who stops missiles using a lightning attack, which causes an explosion. The explosion itself was the issue, as it flashed red and blue lights. Now, flashing lights are not uncommon in cartoons, and in anime they're all over the place. But this was a specific anime technique called Paka Paka, which uses strobe effects with alternating colors at an extremely fast pace with high intensity for several seconds and covering most of the screen. The story about 12,000 people being rushed to the hospital is bunk. It was actually only 685 people, most of them children, as that's the show's target audience. Now, while that sounds like a relatively small amount of people compared to 12,000, try and keep your perspective. It's still a lot. And while 685 people, described as 310 boys and 375 girls, were indeed put into ambulances, Less than 200 of them were admitted to the hospital, and an undisclosed small fraction of them were diagnosed with a condition known as photosensitive epilepsy, which I had mentioned in my Polybius episode. Adding to this, 685 kids did not have seizures, but rather experienced a range of symptoms, from simple dizziness, nausea, and headaches, to more severe symptoms such as blurred vision, temporary blindness, seizures, and loss of consciousness. But the more severe symptoms only happened in a small amount of children. The number 12,000 came after the fact, as some Japanese news sources showed that anywhere from 5 to 10% of the people who viewed the episode later reported mild symptoms, and the most common number thrown around was 12,000, though this is said to be a case of mass hysteria, a psychosomatic reaction to panic in large groups of people. For example, if you were to broadcast a warning to people in a city, telling them that poison gas had been released in the city, and telling them what precautions to take, you'd start to see people reporting symptoms, even if there was never any gas, and especially if you tell the people what sort of symptoms to expect. Those are the symptoms that they will experience. The part about the laws being drafted in Japan to prevent this from happening again is a half-truth. It's sort of like the first episode where I did the Dragon Quest law, as there never really was a law at all, but rather a set of guidelines set by the networks themselves to reduce these issues. These did not ban the use of flashing images, but instead had to do with the duration and intensity of the flashing and how much of the screen they should take up. The part about the episode never airing again is true, as it was never again rebroadcast in Japan, nor ever aired in any other country, though you could see it online in some cases. The story about an edited American version being created and aired is another half-truth. 4Kids Entertainment, who handled the localization of the first season, did indeed dub and edit a version of the episode, with the seizure-inducing scenes mostly intact, but slowed down as to not cause issues. However, the episode was simply never aired. One last thing to mention is that there's another common misconception, that the seizure pattern was caused by a character's flashing eyes. As I explained, it was actually an explosion effect, but it's interesting to note where the flashing eyes bit comes from. It actually came from The Simpsons, who parodied the story in an episode called 30 Minutes Over Tokyo, in which the Simpsons visit Japan and watch a cartoon called Battling Seizure Robots, which doesn't resemble Pokemon as much as it resembles Transformers. The characters are shown flying around with flashing eyes, causing the Simpsons to have seizures. Homer even does it at one point on purpose out of boredom. The seizure-inducing Pokemon has also been spoofed in other cartoons, such as South Park, in the Chin Pokemon episode, where Kenny dies from a seizure induced by a Chin Pokemon video game. Oh, and by the way, Chin Poko means small penis. Yeah, small penis monsters. There's other spoofs, but those are probably the two funniest and the most well-known. Anyway, join me next time and I'll tell you how your children can use their video games to siphon porn from the very air we breathe.